Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello, and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in focus. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the governor of the Bank of England, before he gets sent back to Canada, that is. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We learn about how Brexit will expose us to the risk of recession, discuss the future of the West Lothian question, and of course the innovation and success in business and politics that make it all worthwhile in the end. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Steve Jones, the Chief Executive Officer of Sport for Kids. Steve co-founded the company with Dr. Mark Gould, who jointly have a passion for child development, entertainment, and sporting excellence. S4K is leading a revolution in children's sports entertainment through pioneering coaching programs designed specifically for children. Established just 7 years ago in 2012, today tens of thousands of children utilize their programs across the country, furthering their education. At a time when obesity, especially among our children, is on the rise, the services they deliver are perhaps more important than ever. I'm sure we're all guilty of sitting at our desks for too long each day. Perhaps there is some advice for adults here as well. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for coming on. You know, it's been a good 6 months, I think, or so since Sport for Kids has been in the review. What has the firm been up to since then? I think the listeners would love to know.
Oh, yes. Well, huge kind in terms of expansion and moving forward. We've opened up in 32 territories in the last year across the UK. So lots of new network partners joining us. We launched a number of new products. We've launched, as well as our football, rugby, dance, we've launched cricket, golf and tennis.
Superb.
And we have a big program around something called S4K Outdoors, which has got a lot of woods learning and everything to do with getting children and schools out into the woods and forests and actually absorbing and learning in a very holistic environment.
It sounds like you've been keeping yourself quite busy.
Full, sir.
Well, I think I'm right. Obviously, you co-founded the business in 2012, I think.
2012, right. Yes. Mark and myself, Dr. Mark Gould and myself started off 7 years ago, and we're now right across the UK, but essentially also looking to go international.
And what was
one hell of a ride?
I can imagine, because it is really a short space of time when you think about it. And what was the driving force originally when you set up?
So originally, I had two children of my own, and I saw the way sports provision was being delivered out in the marketplace, both for private providers, clubs, but also schools and nurseries, and it was quite evident that there was a big gap in the market to improve quality and actually deliver the things to children and parents and school teachers and coaches and other stakeholders a much better experience at a much higher quality level of provision. So, you know, one of the passions is to revolutionise children's sport, and that really was the fuel behind the creation of Sport for Kids.
I think you just alluded to it there, but often schools, especially primary schools, you know, they can be without the funding, without the technical skills to support children in sport. How receptive have you found the schools and indeed parents?
I think all of the stakeholders have challenges in different ways. Children themselves have challenges accessing accessible, enjoyable, involving sports experience. Parents have a challenge in trying to find reliable, high-quality provisions and choose the best for their child. The market is very fragmented, and if we were really honest with ourselves, that children in sport are fairly well neglected. Governing bodies, as we know, are focused on the adult game, commercial interests, politics, and safeguarding and so forth. And a lot of sports were invented in the 19th century on big pitches, not really child-friendly.
Quite.
So a lot of those organisations aren't child-centric, and really children's sport is dependent on volunteer coaches, and we know that some great ones, but that can also be inconsistent. There's no standards, there's no curriculum, and what we found, and when we observed, that the supply side of the market is fairly fragmented. Lots of small and local coaches and regional coaches with lack of ability to invest in things that we value, which is things like curriculums, personal record books, training of coaches, and so forth. And you mentioned schools, and several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Ofsted reduced the requirement on schools for the sporting curriculum and replaced a kind of a recommended level of performance with half a page of direction that says schools should really cover these types of activities in their curriculum. And that was natural because schools have been pressurized the last 30 years in academic focus and performance and metrics. So the pressure on that side has meant that Ofsted has come off that and so forth. And we also know, you mentioned budgets, there's facilities are often scarce and are not fit for purpose. Teachers are trained to largely in the academic side, and particularly in junior and primary schools. Teachers, 90-odd% of them are female, they are passionate about academia and so forth, and there is limited space for sports specialists in terms of budgets or training or staff.
Absolutely. I think
it's a challenge for head teachers.
Without a doubt. And I know you've just really mentioned it. Amanda Spillman, obviously the head of Ofsted, said, I think it was just the other week, that there is a risk as things stand, if it's already happened, that sport is and can be squeezed out of schools far too easily. And it's something you see more often than not. It just doesn't get the priority that it perhaps deserves. I think, how many school children now utilise S4K a week, would you say?
So we're into the tens of thousands, because we do a variety of things. So we do weekend skills clubs direct to parents, we do after school clubs, we do PE, we do camps, a large number of different types of sporting activity. So it's into the tens of thousands, and we're covering, probably accessing our network, over 2 million children.
In fact, do you think key to that is being able to be flexible, offering different programs? Because
correct.
100%.
So one of our strengths is that we have what we call 16 service lines. We have a weekend programs, and that is based on what we would say is world-class technical skills wrapped in entertainment, in child development and psychology, and we've provided we've invested a huge amount in R&D of what the world-class technical skills would be. So in football, it's the Dutch curve, Spanish tiki-taka, Brazilian futsal philosophies, and we have done a lot of work around, whether that's the football or the rugby with the All Blacks, around world-class technical techniques and coaching techniques, and those elements we've developed into a curriculum with pillars for each area, and then broken those down into mini and micromotor skills, and then reconstituted them for age-focused experiences and lesson plans and so forth. And each child has their own record book, and we work with the parents to develop the child so the program is transparent, and we focus on progression and so forth. And currently we have 6 of those weekend activities. But we're the only organisation probably in the history of PE to have curriculum for each of the sports in the PE environment. So every single sport that you probably experience in a school, whether it's hockey or netball or football, cricket, athletics or whatever, we have a set program that we're able to deliver to a high level for the children. So you're right, variety is important, but the depth and quality, we're very big. My background's in world-class service industry. We're very big in productizing experience and creating processes and record books.
Yes.
In the school environment, we have something we call a pupil pathway, and the child goes through and attains various levels against each of the sports. So transparent curriculum, transparency, and personal progression is a key part of that.
Without those processes, without that key to detail, I think you won't be successful in continuing to raise standards across the board. So that's so important.
Correct.
Stepping back and speaking more generally about the sector, and maybe an unfair question, but what do you think it is at the moment that is the biggest challenge that's facing it right now?
For us, I think it is probably the lack, and again, taking your message of high level, is the lack of a coordinated vision for children's sport in the UK. And I do believe there is a role to play. We'll combine public and private entities that can create an overall framework and vision, but then able to bring best practices in to deliver the great experiences for each of the stakeholders. And those stakeholders, so it would include coaches, giving them great training and so forth, working with schools and define the standards that they have to achieve, working with the government and Ofsted to provide the funds for training of teachers or coaches brought in externally, and of course the facilities. So the lack of a clear overall framework and vision and programme plan would be the biggest thing that I would say for the UK.
And I think given some of the worrying statistics that have come out of the last few months regarding childhood obesity, regarding the number of children that actively engage in any form of exercise in a given day, I think it's something, it's the nail on the head there. We've got to have a coordinated thing from central government almost in order to make sure that
and the benefits of that, Jonathan, are multifaceted. So Amanda Spielman at Ofsted is now talking about a new framework being launched this September around the rounded individual personal development, and we are preparing our children not just to pass exams and go to university, but also to live a healthy lifestyle. We're talking about mental well-being, but we're also talking about preparation for, to progress the UK, and business are looking for certain capabilities out of our youth and our young adults. And so whether that, and sport has a great role to play, whether or not that is healthy living, whether or not that is leadership skills, teamwork, communication, resilience, all of these aspects that Amanda is talking about around the individual development and personal development is what some of the biggest benefits that we can bring in creating a healthy lifestyle for our children. And the pressures on inactivity are massive, and they've increased hugely in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I assume if Steve Jones was Secretary of State for the day, that would certainly be your number one priority.
That would be I'd roll up my sleeves and start with that straight away.
You do read about nearly a lot of schools that give out iPads to every single child. Perhaps they should be given a cricket bat and a ball instead. But now, I know you mentioned earlier, in fact, Steve, the expansion of S4K has been extraordinary thanks to your hard work. And you alluded to perhaps plans to go overseas as well. Now, obviously, at a time when we're talking not in normal political times at all. So given that and your plans, how is this all working out?
So again, with a kind of a nod to the current situation, status with Brexit, and moving forward to drive international trade and promote UK PLC. I kind of look at this in a very pragmatic way. We have started to work and target various territories. India, we're in dialogue with China, Middle East, and Australia. They're the main ones we're looking at the moment. But there is a whole need for, I believe, government to help small and medium-sized businesses to really lead the charge with international trade. And one of the challenges that we have is lack of knowledge, lack of network. We're small, medium-sized compared to some of the big blue-chip organisations. And it's knowledge in the market. And I know that when we've connected with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, they started to do some good things around research. But if I'm frankly honest, there's a challenge in as much as small and medium-sized companies can't afford investment in consulting and R&D around activities in these international marketplaces. The kind of fees and little grants that you get to support one trip or a meeting just doesn't really tip the decision point to actually leap and go into a territory around the world. We need probably more help in terms of, expertise, the networking, the research, the knowledge in markets, how to go about things, but also there can be costs to actually start that process that are prohibitive for small and medium-sized companies. So that's certainly one thing that I would want to see put in place.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of, and you may disagree, Steve, but a lot of people are saying at the moment that because of this ongoing issue of leaving the European Union, all of the oxygen essentially has been sucked from the room regarding nearly every single other policy area, and it's now becoming quite difficult.
I think you're right, and the ramifications of that are evident on our TV screens every breakfast, news, and so forth. But I'm fairly pragmatic about this whole thing. I think we do need to move forward and do what Brits do well, is get out there and do international trade.
Absolutely.
And be at the forefront of this. We just need to be released from the impasse, the delay, and the confusion. The uncertainty is a big word that's used, and that just stops people moving forward. I believe, contrary almost to your point just now, I actually believe there's pent-up energy and passion to get going in the business community.
And I think that's spot on. It is interesting to see often. It's true that a lot of investment has slowed down, but it's not gone anywhere else.
No,
it's certainly people waiting. I think waiting for a decision to be made, and then I think off we go. But I suppose we'll find out one or the other pretty soon.
Yeah, again, somebody just needs to fire the pistol extra. I mean, there's a lot of talk about cliff face and alarming talk about what people are talking about a no deal. Let me, and your listeners, let me share you a secret that my belief is that there's no such thing as a no deal exit.
Quite.
In fact, leaving with a so-called no deal exit would just trigger the next phase of negotiation. The next day, the gaps and the problems for both sides would then be the focus.
Yes.
There are lots of bits of deals, process and agreements in place for a wide range of things anyway, whether that be security, flights, tariffs, and so forth. If we just move forward, it would just mean that no deal, we wouldn't have to pay the divorce bill or a big chunk of it, and then there would be more focused horse trading. Negotiations wouldn't stop on exit point if there was what was called a so-called no deal. We'd carry on moving forward.
I think you will certainly get echoing the opinions of an awful lot of business people at this point. It's a far more practical thing. A lot of politicians talk about this only in theory, I think. Correct.
And the backdrop, people forget that the EU is struggling with growth, and we've seen, a number of, whether it was Japan, Vietnam, South America, they're doing a number of free trade deals in several areas of the world to try and move that growth piece forward. The difference with ourselves is that we actually align on everything already on standards and policies, and there would be a good basis for a free trade deal quickly, because the point of pain on both sides would focus the minds. And if Brexit was out and behind us, then there wouldn't be the political game around the backstop and the club mentality of Brussels, and we just need to then release ourselves from that and get on and do some business.
Yes, and I suppose if anybody has ever watched the European Union try to negotiate something before, they very rarely agree to anything before usually 1 minute past midnight.
Correct.
So it'll be interesting to find out what happens, I suppose, not long to go till we do find out. Now, perhaps to bring back things a little closer to home, the company's had an exceptional success over the last few years. What have been, a lot of people listening to this obviously are, younger businessmen, budding entrepreneurs as well. What have been your guiding principles that have got you to where you are?
We have a focal point, which is one is to revolutionise children's sport, but the other also is to revolutionise service industry processes in this space, and through franchising to revolutionise the success of franchising in this space, which has stalled in some way. That clear vision is underpinned by a number of key principles around innovation, an amazingly caring culture, passionate supporting each other. We've invested in technology. We're constantly looking at continuous improvements as a culture. We don't get too emotional about problems. If there's a coach or a situation that there's a problem, there's no finger pointing, no blame. We say, well, therefore we take the blame on our shoulders because we mustn't have defined the process as well as it should have been, or done the training or the quality management for that situation, for that thing to break, that lesson plan to go wrong. We take it on ourselves. So the culture around world-class service industry being brought into this space has been a big part of that.
And I think lastly, looking towards the future, here, Steve, what would you say to young people, especially those still in school themselves, who might be looking to go into a career in children's sport development? It can be a tough field, and your advice, I think, would be appreciated.
Yes, so I would say it is an exceptionally rewarding experience when you actually develop a child and they improve a skill, or you see them 2 or 3 years later and they've totally transformed themselves. They're confident, they're really progressing well. It gives you great pride as an individual coach or a business owner that's doing. But I would say that the sporting industry, we're seeing a lot of sport at the moment on our TVs, is going to increasingly be one of the most significant and important things, not just in the UK, but worldwide. And developing skills and expertise in this space can future-proof your both career and your life, a healthy lifestyle, and a great way of developing yourself for the future.
And of course, Steve, one of the reasons I think for S4K's success has been, working with the right people and making sure they're the right people to work with.
100%. And talent, and again, for aspiring business people building their businesses, is one of the key principles that we have, is selecting the right people. We have a set profile, so we look for sports entertainers, kind of CBBS, rather than a coach that might put out cones and shout at people. But we choose them, but we also have invested heavily in our S4K career pathway. And again, we know that children and aspiring youth and young people looking to what to do their careers are increasingly looking at maybe not going to university, or they may not be academic. How can they develop a career that's of great value to themselves? And so the S4K career pathway actually starts at, we do work experience for 14 and 16-year-olds. And 16 plus, once we get there, we've got a full apprenticeship program. We've got our own proprietary, high world-class, high technical skill coaching, but we also got generic sports education coaching at the 16 plus in an apprenticeship model. At 18 plus, we have something called the S4K Professional, and for graduates from university, we have something called the S4K Masters Program. And sport and education and the children's space is a great career opportunity, and it doesn't matter whether you want to be a master coach, an elite coach in elite sport, say in football or tennis, or you want to be involved in management, general management of sport, or one of the things that we are seeing a lot recently is there is a big dearth of teachers and PE teachers. We're actually developing foundation courses that people can actually go on to vocational journey to become a teacher. And again, with the fallout of teachers out of education and the dearth of new talent coming in, that's another area where we want to make a difference. But certainly choosing the right people and supporting them with their career and development is a big part of the whole approach.
And have you found the market pretty receptive? I assume you don't struggle to find the talent.
No, the way to do it is actually to be close to the schools and the colleges and share with the careers officers and go and work with the schools to share these career opportunities for the students. And that's been a big, both in terms of numbers and quality, we attract the best.
A wonderful message. Steve, thank you very much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Take care.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Steve, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team, Sport for Kids, are continuing to raise standards. I think I'll certainly have to do some extra exercise this week. Well, some exercise, and I'm sure you'll all do the same. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society, and when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now.
We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognize they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I write in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want, it's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, "What are you up to?" And I say, "I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done."
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. There has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, not even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party, is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship.
Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through parliamentary review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly, the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly, the way in which they need to tell us, I mean, I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no days yet, though, where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it. That's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognise that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests, and I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Marquis of Granby to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.